Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And my topic for tonight is current neoliberal disasters. And I'll be discussing and commenting on a number of articles, altogether 5 articles. The first 2 deal with situation, in Maui. By the way, I should be joined in a few minutes by Dee Piers, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. And I am being joined by Lisa Theobald. Hi, Lisa. How you doing tonight? And how's the house going? I had the feeling you'd be joining me tonight. I'm not. Okay. I'm going to start with the first article. All these pieces are from Common Dreams. Okay, the first one is called Is 93 Confirmed Dead? Locals fear Lahaina rebuild dominated by rich outsiders. This was published, I believe, on August 13th, 2023, and the author is Jessica Corbett. A quote from the piece: disaster capitalism will happen yet again unless they act but proactively. Formerly the capital of the Hawaiian Kingdom, until the United States overthrew the Hawaiian Kingdom, of course, Lahaina, on the island of Maui, was ravaged by a wildfire that has killed 93 people as of Sunday. It is now Thursday, of course, and the death toll has risen to 110. Locals now fear wealthy outsiders will dominate and further serve themselves with the multi-billion-dollar rebuild from the recent devastation in the 50th U.S. state. Excuse me for a second. Lisa says, I'm exhausted. The house is beautiful. The Bale Bay, is there a lot of work to do? Oh, she said, but boy, oh boy. So boy, oh boy, there's a lot to work to do. I figured because you've been pretty quiet for the last 2 days or so. But you love it, of course, right? Okay, so back to the article. Locals now feel wealthy outsiders would dominate and further serve themselves with the multi-billion-dollar rebuild from the recent devastation in the 50th state. Quote, Lahaina residents worry that rebuilt homes in their Maui town could slip into the hands of affluent outsiders seeking a tropical haven rather than homegrown residents who give the Hawaiian island its spirit and identity, unquote. The Associated Press wrote on social media Sunday, sharing new reporting from Hawaii. Naomi Klein, author of several books, including The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism, responded with one word, quote, again, unquote. After American expatriates and sugar planters backed by the U.S. troops led the 1893 coup that disposed the Hawaiian kingdoms, Queen Liliuokalani The United States formally annexed the islands in 1898. Hawaii became a state in 1959. Even before Tuesday's fire, which was enabled by climate wrecking fossil fuel companies and land management decisions that have diverted water away from the area. That's a key. That's a key. The area used to have plenty of water. It was diverted away by decisions on land management. Quote, a chronic housing shortage and an influx of second home buyers and wealthy transplants have been displacing residents, unquote. The Associated Press noted. Richie Palale, who had, quote, a Lahaina grown, unquote, tattooed on his forearms when he was 16, told the outlet at a shelter on Saturday that, quote, I'm more concerned of big land developers coming in and seeing this charged land as an opportunity to rebuild, unquote. Condos and hotels, quote again, that we can't afford to live in. That's what we're afraid of, unquote, said Mr. Palale, who didn't yet know whether the house where he rents a room for $1,000, I assume that's $1,000 a month, survived the fire which destroyed the restaurant where he works. The Pacific Disaster Center and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, estimate that 86% of the 2,719 structures in Maui County exposed to fire, the deadliest in the United States in over a century, were residential. 4,500 people may be in need of shelter, and rebuilding could cost $5.52 billion. The AP's reporting on Sunday sparked warnings from Kanaka Maoli, a term Native Hawaiians use to refer to themselves, as well as campaigners and experts beyond the islands. Quote, reports suggest 93 people are dead, 1,000 people are missing, and 2,700 structures are destroyed, said Yuhikea Maoli, a Kanaka Maoli activist and scholar and assistant professor of indigenous politics at the University of Toronto, St. George. Quote, the colonial speculation of disaster capitalism is happening right now in Lahaina. Former National Women's Soccer League player Mana Shim, who was also Kanaka Maoli, wrote on social media, quote, this is a major concern, needs our immediate attention. It's awful to have to discuss this before we know how many have lost their lives, but anyone who knows disaster capital knows the urgency of protecting our Aina from developers and greedy Malahini. By Malahini, she means a foreigner, newcomer, or a stranger, while Aina is a Hawaiian term for land, or earth. Klein, who coined the term disaster capitalism, has said, quote, the way I define disaster capitalism is really straightforward. It describes the way private industries spring up to directly profit from large-scale crises. Some users of X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, pointed to past examples of such exploitation. Here's a tweet, from Angelica Duenas, who ran for Congress a few times now and may well run again. She's a wonderful candidate, actually. I've interviewed her now, must be 4 times. It happened after Northridge earthquake, after Hurricane Katrina, after the fire in Paradise. FYI, PG&E pled guilty to manslaughter of 84 people after most devastating natural, quote-unquote, disasters The mega rich salivate at the thought of an opportunity for profiteering off it. And this is from the Associated Press. Lahaina residents worry that rebuilt homes near Maui town could slip in the hands of affluent outsiders seeking a tropical haven rather than homegrown recipients who give the Hawaiian island spirit, and identity. That I actually quoted that before. Institute for Policy Studies fellow Sanho Tree said Sunday that, quote, disaster capitalism will happen yet again unless they act proactively, unquote. In an interview earlier this week with Heat Map by Kenyella Ng, someone else who's run for Congress, who I interviewed a couple of times, seventh generation native Hawaiian from Maui, and national director of the Green New Deal network, took aim at the fossil fuel companies that have heated the planet, as well as mismanagement of land and water tied to, quote, corporations that stem from the original Big Five oligarchy in Hawaii, the first five missionary families who control our government, rich, white, right-wing families, unquote. Quote, we want to make sure that as we recover, once the direct relief efforts are done, the cameras have left. We understand that recovery will take years. As that recovery unfolds, we want to make sure that the people, the communities are actually empowered to rebuild themselves, that we don't open the door for disaster capitalists, unquote, Ng said. And quote again, unfortunately, the institutions best poised to distribute direct aid are also most likely to enable disaster capitalists to exploit this strategy, unquote. He continued, quote again, they're actively raising millions, and once the spotlight moves from our island, what's to come of those monies and who's really going to benefit? Those are questions that I think we need to be really proactive about answering on our own as community organizers, unquote. Quote again, and maybe in this opportunity, like we all understand that we're going to have to be lobbying for additional FEMA funds, federal funds, state and local funds, unquote. He added, quote again, we want to make sure that the people, the forces that contributed to this problem in the first place are pushed out of power for a more community ground up sort of infrastructure. So there's a lot of mutual aid and power building that needs to happen immediately. So what's going on here is that this is right now, okay, a neoliberal disaster because it was caused by the kind of neoliberal investments we saw before for generations in Hawaii, but also furthermore, there's a double sort, okay, of neoliberal whammy on here because the big money wants to come in to buy up the area to rebuild, so it is able to profit off of it. So we have to be very clear about that. This post has been updated to correct the name of Uahikia Maili. I hope I pronounced it better that time. I think I butchered her name the first time around. Have I been joined by... Nope, I've been joined by... Kay says hi all. Steve says hi Kay. Kay says hi Steve. Over 100 dead now. Yes, 111 dead. I mentioned that earlier, Steve, before you arrived. Yes, Steve, very sad. Robert says, I just got out of a meeting right now. Glad to see you here, Robert. I'm going to go back to our second article now. And this is also an update on the Lahaina situation. Let me show the article to you. Share screen. This is an opinion piece, and it's also from Common Dreams, and it was written by Andrea Brower. Empire and capital set the island of Maui ablaze. The struggle now is the one that punctuates all moments of crisis. The forces of disaster capitalism versus the people attempting to build a paradise out of hell. Over 100 people, likely many more, well, okay, the latest count is 110, were burned alive, and an estimated 1,300 are still missing on Maui in one of the most deadly and destructive wildfires in history. There's probably D coming in right now. Yes, there is D coming in.
Good evening.
Hi D, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. We've been joined by Steve Wolfbrandt, Robert Copeland, Kay Ryan, and Lisa Theobald. I don't think I
Great.
missed anyone. Uh, so happy to see Lisa here.
Yes, me too.
Uh,
It's always good to see the gang.
yeah, it is good to see the gang. So I'm through the first article at this point. This was a, it was a piece on the Maui fires. Okay, the point of it was okay, we've had a disaster. That particular disaster was due to neoliberalism and to the strand of capitalism that's so characteristic of it. But now the question is, how are they going to rebuild? Okay, and the big issue is, are the local people going to rebuild from the ground up, or are the disaster capitalists going to come in, dominate the area with their big money, and are they going to build it up in such a way that there's no place for the native people? And uh, so that's a big issue there. What you're now seeing is the second article, and uh, I was just about to go through the second sentence of it. First is 100, over 100 people, likely many more. It's been 110 now, we know, were burned alive, and an estimated 1,300 still missing on Maui, one of the most deadly and destructive wildfires in history. The dire crisis continues as hospitals are overwhelmed with burn patients. The residents inhale highly toxic air. The community reels with trauma, and also basic necessities fail to get to those who are most in need. Countless Kanaka Maoli, native Hawaiians, and workers, including many undocumented and unprotected immigrants, lost everything and may never be able to establish their lives in the Lahaina area. Okay, Lahaina, for background, for those of you who don't know, was the capital of the Hawaiian people till the kingdom, okay, was overthrown by the Howleys. We, of course, are the Howleys, the Americans, okay, in 1898. Uh, with only 25% of the devastated area searched by rescue teams, developers, and realtors, are already swooping in to try to buy land from displaced locals, a callous incarnation of our current social order. The human caused roots of the Maui atrocity and the already in motion fight for what happens next have everything to do with empire, capitalism, elite power, and their ravaging of the planet and people. That what has emerged from the bottom up in response to the disaster, ordinary people collectively and creatively organizing to generously and selflessly care for one another, shows us the alternative to the world that imperial capital has compelled. It is also the world that the vast majority of us long for so deeply. Yeah, I think we do long for it so deeply, don't we, Dee? Ah, so multiple wildfires across typically wet tropical islands are a chilling reminder that climate catastrophe is upon us. The quote, absolutely unprecedented, unquote, is our new norm. Our planet is ablaze. The impacts of climate change are heating harder and faster than scientists predicted even less than a decade ago. Tipping points and cascades are already occurring at around 1.2 degrees Celsius of warming on our current trajectory. We're facing a cataclysmic 2.7 to 4.4 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of this century. In Hawaii, we are increasingly accustomed to floods, hurricanes, tsunamis, even sea level rise. But wildfires of this nature came as an absolute shock to most of us. Despite scientists warning to government and large landowners for years, heat and severe drought turned parts of Hawaii into a tinderbox, quote unquote, before a high pressure system in the north and a hurricane passing to the south lowered humidity and caused forceful winds to blow up multiple fires. All of these effects of climate change are going to get worse. Hawaii is already getting 90% less rainfall than it did a century ago. But by the way, that's stunning. 90% less rainfall than it did a century ago, with the severity of drought being particularly acute in the past 15 years. Drought in Hawaii, I can't believe that. I was in Hawaii in 1968 and 1969. I was able to spend 3 months there. Okay, in 1968, I was doing some research there. Bonnie and I had just a wonderful and lovely time there. And of course, there was no drought then. We didn't see any drought. All we saw was basically fertility. Uh, and we visited Maui. Uh, the whole thing was just a wonderful experience. We loved Hawaii, absolutely loved it. So hard to read all this stuff about it. Parallel to climate change, quote, tinderbox conditions were created by appalling land and water management for the benefit of the elite. Neoliberalism, folks, neoliberalism. Major
Mhm.
water diversions, first for plantation agriculture and then for tourism and gentlemen estates, have radically altered ecosystems. Landowners and water diverters, like the old sugar barons, Alexander and Baldwin, may bear some direct culpability for the death and destruction on Maui. The company has a long history of ferociously and corruptly fighting Kanaka Maoli, the native Hawaiians, and environmentalists over restoring diverted water to its natural watersheds. Some of the very same players diverting water, like Alexander and Baldwin, left
Mhm.
broad swaths of land covered in highly flammable invasive grasses, despite abundant warning they were creating a potentially catastrophic fire hazard. Fire prone the vegetation like guinea grass brought to Hawaii by sugar oligarchs to feed livestock has been left to cover over a quarter of Hawaii's land in the transition from monocrop plantations to tourism development. Climate change and water deprived land covered in combustible non native vegetation have led to other serious fires in recent years, okay, a phenomenon Hawaii is highly unprepared for. Multiple studies and articles have warned that Hawaii is, quote, primed, unquote, for wildfires. In 2018 and 2021, fires burned thousands of acres and destroyed hundreds of homes. The growing threat was largely ignored. because it was inconvenient and expensive to the powerful. When last week's fires broke out, the occupying U.S. state, which ideologically justifies its presence through appeals to protection, quote unquote, failed in its emergency response. Not a single alarm siren was activated during the fires. Power lines stayed on despite fire hazard warnings from the National Weather Service. Firefighters and disaster response teams were radically under resourced to save people and remain, quote, overwhelmed, unquote, in the days after. A week later, despite the immense resources held by the U.S. military and settler elites in Maui, Bezos, Oprah, Jimmy Buffett, Jensen Huang, just to name a few, ordinary people are still without food, fuel, and water. The mutual aid efforts led by Kanaka Maoli, again the native Hawaiians, have proven far more effective at delivering disaster relief. The proximate causes of the horrific Maui tragedy, a rapidly warming climate, land, quote, primed to burn, unquote, and lack of preparedness share the same underlying roots: capital and empire, or more specifically, a social system violently forced upon most of the world that is premised upon unending extraction and exploitation of people and environment for accumulation of private wealth. In Hawaii, imperial capitalism has dispossessed most of the native population, consolidated power and resource control to a remarkable degree, created a society of lavish wealth alongside extreme poverty, ravaged the Aina, that which feeds or land, commodified Hawaii and Hawaiian culture, and increasingly delivered huge chunks of paradise into the vacation home portfolio of the elite. These are the conditions that created water diversions, denuded land, and neglect of potential disaster that always hits hardest at the bottom of social hierarchies. As Kanyala Ing succinctly put it, quote, colonial greed is burning down our home, unquote. Excuse me for a second while I take some tea. These histories and the monstrous repercussions are relatively recent ones in the long span of human history in the islands. Knowing the recent history of imperialism and capitalism in Hawaii and their ongoing contestation denaturalizes the current social order. It reminds us that much different kinds of social orders have existed in our human past, survive in our present, and are possible in our future. For over a millennium, Hawaii's peoples lived in steady balance with the rest of the web of life, sustaining dense populations through sophisticated agro-ecological production, structured by relationships of reciprocity. Indigenous Hawaiian production was organized cooperatively around ohana, or extended family units. People freely accessed land, water, sea, and forests, while evolving indigenous Hawaiian society was not free from class hierarchy. It was defined by beliefs and structures of collectivity, human freedom, reciprocity, and redistribution. Systems of production and distribution were designed to ensure that all had enough and that careful stewardship and reverence for the earth were maintained. It was a society in which the logics of capitalism, of unabated exploitation of land and people for personal gain, extreme individualism, absolute private ownership, accumulation of wealth for wealth's sake, and the deprivation of many alongside excess riches for very few would have been structurally impossible and culturally unintelligible. The Kanaka Maoli power in and over the islands remained strong in the first decades of increasing contact with Euro American capitalists and imperialists, even as they navigated widespread death from introduced disease. The 19th century was one of competitive Euro American imperialism throughout the Pacific, okay, and militarily imposed agreements for repayment of accused debt ensnared Hawaii in the imperial commercial economy even before it was recognized by colonial powers as a sovereign nation. While the Hawaiian kingdom worked to maintain sovereign indigenous governance for almost all of the 19th century, capitalism and its violent backers steadily engulfed the islands. As the interests of sugar capitalists increasingly collided with the Hawaiian kingdom, white oligarchs secured the backing of the U.S. military in overthrowing the indigenous government. By the early 1900s, 5 sugar corporations descended from 4 missionary families controlled virtually the entirety of the economy and the government that served it. Sugar production thrived for decades because an anti-democratic, illegally occupying state secured the industry's elite minority interests, maintained extreme class and ethnic inequalities, and delivered the land, water, and laborers that it demanded. Sugar production in the mid and late 20th century moved to cheaper locations to exploit, largely in response to militant interracial worker organizing. However, the legacies of the plantation persist. Today, Hawaii is entirely dependent on vertically integrated corporate tourism economy. It provides cheap labor, natural resources, infrastructure, and other government support in exchange for low-wage jobs and an inflated cost of living. The change in form, but not in function, from plantation days of past. A Lahaina, the setting of the fires, embodies these colonial and capitalist assaults, as well as their resistance. Pre-colonial Lahaina, with older names, okay, like Malulu, the Olele, land of the flying breadfruit, quote unquote, was a place of wetlands and extensive food tree forests. It has long been seen by Kanaka Maoli as a highly sacred place. Um, Ali'i, problematically translated to, quote, chiefs, unquote, by colonists, would gather in Lahaina for governance, and it was the capital of the Hawaiian kingdom for 50 years. Lahaina became one of the first commercial centers of the islands with the entrance of whaling, which gave rise to a growing population of foreign traders looking to, quote, grow rich rapidly, unquote, in the islands. Thick groves of breadfruit and fish ponds were destroyed to make way for export-oriented sugar production. In the 1960s, sugar capitalists started cashing in for land development, which continued to require water diversions and further, quote, denuding, unquote, of the land. West Maui is now choked with hotels and tourism infrastructure that services 2 million people who visit every year. In the middle of the ongoing systematic extraction of wealth and resources from Lahaina, it remains the home of many Kanaka Maoli. Their secret sites, burials, and cultural centers like Aikani o Maui, invaluable cultural artifacts, documents, and art were turned to ash in the flames that burnt a Lahaina to the ground. It's a chilling symbol of the rapaciousness of capital and empire. Others at the bottom of Hawaii's social hierarchy. Excuse me, I scrolled down a little too fast. Uh, Others at the bottom of Hawaii's social hierarchies are also hardest hit by the fires. Housing is excessively unaffordable and difficult to find in Maui, and the thousands of working class people rendered homeless will not simply be able to find new places to live. Those already living on the edges, which are the majority in Hawaii, will be further pushed into lives of precarity under the existing social order. A large portion of Lahaina's population was immigrants. Many will lack access to federal relief. As the ash settles, inequalities will be further cemented. The struggle now is the one that punctuates all moments of crisis. The forces of disaster capitalism versus the people attempting to build a paradise out of hell. Capitalism compels a grotesque search for profit wherever it is to be made, even in desperate times. The system knows no morality. As capital and empire turn Maui and the planet into a burning nightmare, power could consolidate in increasingly violent and extractive ways. The people that are and will be hit the hardest are those who have already been most brutalized by the past centuries of imperialism, capitalism, racism, patriarchy that delivered us to this apex. But even at this
One
stage,
thing I want to say something is that there's many videos going around I saw on TikTok talking about the wealthy there. Um, Oprah Winfrey. You have a lot of different well-known people living not too far away, and that just seems that suspicion that the fires just didn't hit them at all. And the same thing happened in 2017, that people are questioning what is really going on here.
well, I think what probably happened, I don't know if this is true because I don't have enough of familiarity with the area and how it's changed over the last, let's say, 60 years or so. But uh, they were diverting the natural course of water, okay, on the island, and they were probably diverting it to the rich estates. So, since the rich estates had plenty of water, it may be they were able to protect themselves from these fires. That's just speculation on my part. But even at this apex, the future is not a far gone conclusion. Social relations that have existed since time immemorial in indigenous Hawaii reminded all of us that a world beyond the prisons of capital and empire are possible. The ways people are mobilizing to care for one another in the wake of Maui's disaster illuminate our deepest human selves: generosity, compassion, cooperation, interdependence. Both show us the alternative to systems premised on hierarchy, exploitation, and greed. They show us that humans are absolutely capable of constructing far more utopic futures that are structured to incentivize, inspire, and cultivate the best of our human capacities rather than the worst. Our different potential future trajectories couldn't be more stark. Maui is a powerful reminder that we all need to fight like hell to get out of hell. Support mutual aid efforts on Maui. And that's how the article ends. Would you like to make any further comments on the article, D?
Well, it's interesting too when it went back into the history, and I was reading with the whole colonialism. You notice the same pattern that's used everywhere. They send Christian missionaries in. Now, these people most likely just doing something they think is the right thing to do. But the business people and the elite use them to take over places. Because in this article I was reading today, it talked about the Christian missionaries going in there, and then the offspring of the Christian missionaries and business people were looking to where the sugar was concerned and big sugar, and started all of that with the business and taking over. And next thing you know, the military came in, and but it was quite interesting how things changed over, and we see that everywhere in the world. It's kind of like the colonizers will send missionaries in, and the next thing you know, as time goes on, the wealthiest and the businesses use or steal from the whoever they're trying to take over and do the normal thing that they always do.
Yes, I entirely agree with that comment. Okay, I also think that the article, that last article, was really beautifully written and constructed from the social science point of view, from the historical point of view. It was really a very in depth article on the background and context, okay, for what happened, and very much on point as to where we go from here. Very much on point in putting the blame for the disaster where it belongs. Now, what we're going to do about it, okay, I don't know. The interests who want to rebuild there, of course, are very, very powerful with all kinds, okay, of money. And I don't know how they're going to shape the federal intervention there. I think the federal intervention is going to be fairly heavy, but whether it opens the way in classical neoliberal fashion for the interests to come in and rebuild it as they please, that is something we have to watch out for, okay, and work against.
Another issue going on is there were conferences, and Hawaii was at the conference about the AI cities they were talking about. And there's another one coming up in September. And now
By
he was
the
talking about,
AI cities, you're talking about artificial intelligence.
yes, artificial intelligence cities. That is what's being talked about where Maui is concerned. Hawaii had said they were on top of it. The governor of Hawaii had at the last conference that he was at, and they're having another meeting is going on in September, and that's kind of scary. AI, I don't know, AI cities. I know Saudi Arabia has their Lion City is an AI city. We just looked that up before. Madeline showed me something with that. But here, yes, in Hawaii, an AI city.
Hmm.
There's just a lot of suspicion. If you start reading up,
I think with AI cities, okay, the devil, okay, is in the details. I think it's a
mhm.
term that covers, okay, a whole multitude of possible sins, uh, and also maybe a way forward in certain ways as well. But really, with that sort of thing, the devil is in the details.
Right, and we've seen AI has been tested on the Palestinians.
Right, but AI isn't always the same, okay, in every area. Its applications, okay, are not always the same. Uh, okay, it can be applied in all sorts of ways. It isn't really necessarily a hostile tool, but as with everything else, we have to worry about the greed uh, that gets to underlie these applications, the lack of concern for the humans involved, uh, the business interests, and the desire to put the profits over people.
Right, well, the state
Whether
of
it
Hawaii is
turns
taking
out
over the
well,
area.
whether it turns out well or does not turn out well, okay, is a matter of the politics and whether the people can grab hold of the politics and make sure things happen from the ground up. Okay, and that's true for AI cities, as it's true for any other kind of cities, maybe
Right. In the state of
especially.
Hawaii, the governor gave a speech and saying that he is taking over, the government's taken over that area. So it's not private land, it's going to be public.
That's good. In other words, that would be good. But then, of course, we have to make sure the politicians, the governor and other politicians, don't themselves actually sell out, okay, to the private interests. Okay, who
Right.
don't.
So the people that want to rebuild there, what does that say for people if you're a homeowner? You were a homeowner there. What does that say for you?
Okay, it says you have a difficult future, okay, ahead of you, and that you're going to have to seriously fight out the politics of this. And it's going to be hard because the other side has so much money to begin with. And also, there are so many poor people who live there, okay, in Hawaii. Uh, they have a very small middle class, very much a working class place, okay, and a rich person's case. That was actually true when we lived there during the 1960s for the 3 months, okay, that I spoke about. It was very apparent that there was a social hierarchy there that was very pronounced, and that the rich people had the political say even back then. And I know in the years since it's just gotten worse and worse. So there's a lot of fighting that's going to have to go on against the neoliberals there, because they are very, very powerful. Okay, let's go on to another piece. In fact, I think now I'm going to turn to some comments and let's see what we have. Okay, let's see what we have here. Let's take some comments. People say hi, of course. And Robert Coleman said that was even more people died in Hawaii than the number of people died in Paradise a few years ago, which was almost 90 people died. Yeah, it is more people than that. Steve Wolfbrand says, I've been there. Those buildings were historical and cannot be replaced. Yeah, I know. I know, they're historical. Steve Wolfbrand says, smash the like button. And Steve Wolfbrand says, hopefully the banyan tree survives. Yes, there's an issue there. It may survive. It's those trees are very hardy, but it is going to be tough. Robert Colton says, I was in Hawaii in 1997. It was a beautiful place to visit. Oh, yes. 1,300 still missing. Oh, yes. As of that latest article, there are going to be more fatalities. If 1,300 are missing, I think there's still going to be a lot more fatalities. Steve Wolfman says, that tree is like the spirit, okay, of Lahaina. If it dies, it would be terrible. Yes, and it could die also. It's very hardy, but it could die. A lot of it was badly burnt. Kay says, yes, it would, Steve. Steve says, Robert, I lived a few years in Hawaii. It's extremely beautiful indeed. Steve, you were in Hawaii for a lot longer than me, yes, and a lot longer than me, too. Robert says, as I was there for a week. Doc, a hurricane, ironically named Hillary, is heading toward us here in Los Angeles. Hasn't happened since 1939. We are to be the first landfall. That might be very rough. We have to talk to our daughter quickly. We talked to her just a few days back, but I don't think it had appeared yet. Lisa said, when, Steve? Steve says, Lisa, Saturday evening. Hurricane Hillary is currently off the coast of Cabo, growing from 2 to 4. Oh, God, category 4. Hopefully, will die down before hitting our cooler waters. Lisa sends some hearts. Jeffrey says, "Hi, Fitty. Hurricane Hillary will probably decimate all of California except for Malibu, Hollywood, okay, and Beverly Hills." Why would Malibu, Hollywood, and Beverly Hills escape? Because they escape everything, Jeffrey. Could be. Anyway, let's get on to the next piece. Okay, this one is about the housing crisis. I will present it. Sky high housing costs fuel record surge in homelessness. Of course, this one was written by Jake Johnson for Common Dreams. It appeared on August 15th. Persistently high housing costs and the end of pandemic era relief programs have fueled a sharp increase in homelessness in the U.S. this year, according to analysis published Monday by the Wall Street Journal. The Journal reported homelessness nationwide for Denver and New Orleans and New York City is up 11% so far this year compared to 2022, and more than 582,000 experienced homelessness. This year's increase holds, the Journal noted, would mark the largest jump since 2007, the year the U.S. government began tracking comparable data. We and others have, quote, have repeatedly predicted this increase in homelessness, unquote. Diane Yentel, president and CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition, the NLIHC, wrote in response to the new figures, quote again, "When rents skyrocket amidst a severe shortage of affordable housing and a shredded safety net, more people become homeless. It really is that simple and preventable." The NLIHC observed in a June report that, quote, during the pandemic, housing advocates and impacted people helped to bring about the enactment of unprecedented policy measures, including $46 billion in emergency rental assistance and a national eviction moratorium that reduced suffering for millions of households. Quote again, additionally, economic impact payments, increases to unemployment insurance, and supplemental nutrition assistance programs, SNAP benefits, child care tax credits help keep low and middle income renters afloat, unquote. The report added, and quote again, "Yet now that emergency resources are being depleted and many of these measures phased out, low-income renters are once again facing high rents and increased housing instability, with eviction filing rates reaching or surpassing pre-pandemic levels, and homelessness increasing in many communities. As pandemic relief measures and renter protections faded in 2021 and last year, evictions surged, and housing costs continue to rise across the country, with the median national rent surpassing $2,000 a month for the first time. The government, that's $2,000 a month, folks, with I think there's a median income in the United States right now of something like 56,000. I don't know if that's exact, but I don't think I'm far off. So the 2,000 a month is $24,000 a year for rent out of the 56,000. I mean, that's what, 40% or something like that. And of course, people do have to pay taxes sometimes, certainly sales taxes. The Government Accountability Office estimated a $100 increase in the median U.S. rent is associated with a 9% increase in homelessness. The COVID relief funds provided a buffer, quote unquote. Donald Whitehead Jr., Executive Director, National Coalition for the Homeless, told the Journal on Monday, quote, "We're seeing what happens when those resources aren't available." So, okay, you're getting the point of this. We are having skyrocketing homelessness here in the United States. Final paragraph of this article, which quotes, "At the national level," unquote, they added, quote, Rent makes up about 1/3 of the consumer price index, and rent increases have played a major role in the recent uptick in inflation and run the risk of posing long term threats to the nation's economy. But, okay, at the national level, given the CPI, it make up 1/3 of the consumer price index. But for individual families, if there's median incomes of less than 56,000, okay, and median rents now that are exceeding 2,000, then for many people, rent is making up a much larger proportion, okay, of their income, much larger, okay, than the 1/3. Those aggregate figures I cited showed something like 43%, just off the top of my head. Uh, it's hard for people to find places. Often they can't, and often they're homeless, okay, as a result. Okay, D, any comments on that one?
It's just amazing. And they talk about what it costs for people to get by, rent, this, that, and the other thing. And then you look at people, I say I'm going to use Kay for example. What she gets monthly, and what different people get monthly, they don't get enough to survive.
Yes, they don't get enough to survive. And I have to point out that this is also due to neoliberalism, okay, in policy. The Fed has been goosing property values uh, for many years, okay, all over the country now. Quantitative easing was a lot about that. Okay, the day-to-day economy wasn't that much affected by the quantitative easing, but the long-run effect in increasing the property values gets to be devastating, and we're seeing that now. And the recent policies of the Federal Reserve, okay, have exacerbated this, and the fact, okay, that the government, okay, has let in the Black Rocks of the world and the Vanguards of the world to snap up the properties, basically monopolize the properties, okay, across the country, the residential properties, okay, across the country, and then to rent them out at much higher rents across the United States. There was nothing to stop that, because the idea, okay, of interfering with the freedom of businesses to speculate, okay, in property and to buy it up, okay, on a mass basis, and then to turn around, okay, that fed the speculation in property values and is still feeding the speculation, okay, in property values, and is making residential property unaffordable across the country. It's driven by the neoliberal economy, by the neoliberal values, by the fact that government will not intervene and restrict the freedom of the business people for the sake of the freedom of the rest of us. That is what is going on here. The rest of us are being impoverished by a few of us for the sake of their economic freedom. I say, down with their economic freedom. We need some economic freedom too. And that includes the freedom to live somewhere at a decent cost.
That's where we're seeing so many people leaving. People have gone to different sections of Mexico and different places in South America.
That is certainly true, okay, of older people who have a fixed income, which is adequate, okay, in other nations, but is not adequate here.
No, it shouldn't
Yes,
be. Then there's no political party representing the people. the average people.
Yes, both of the major political parties, of course, as we know. Okay, that's the duopoly. And in the short run, there's only one way to get rid of the duopoly and to put in people who are going to work for us. That is to dump the corruption.
Yes, put up your picture that you have of what has to be done.
I think I'll wait till later to do that because we have some other things to go through
Okay.
as well. But yes, I will put that up when the time comes. As we discussed also last night, I pinned the rule to my Twitter account and I pinned it in my Facebook account also.
Yes, and if everybody could do that, we just need more people to
Now we need more people to do that, to participate.
yes, and understand what we're talking about when we talk about dumping the corruption.
Right. So here's another neoliberal outrage. Just 5 oil giants, this is from Common Dreams also, set to blow an eighth of the world's carbon budget by 2050. Okay, this is an analysis. This puts the world on a dangerous trajectory of significantly overshooting climate targets. This is by Jake Johnson, too. This was August 15th, 2023. Just 5 fossil fuel giants: BP, Shell, ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Total Energies. I don't even recognize the name Total Energies. I'm sure they used to have another name that I would very much recognize. But who the hell who the hell Total Energies are? I don't know. Maybe the article will bring that to us. Are set to use nearly an eighth of the world's dwindling carbon budget by 2050 as they continue to increase oil and gas production, driving up planet warming emissions that are fueling catastrophic extreme weather worldwide, according to an analysis released Tuesday by Global Witness. Those 5 corporations are forecast to produce oil and gas that, when burned, will emit roughly 47 million tons of carbon dioxide. Jesus, 47 million tons of carbon dioxide. Billion, sorry, 47 billion tons of carbon dioxide, not million, a billion. This is equivalent to almost 1/8 of the remaining global carbon budget for staying below 1.5 degrees Celsius, quote unquote, the group noted, referring to the warming target set by the Paris Climate Accord. Scientists have estimated that rich nations must completely cut off oil and gas production by 2034 to give the world a 50% chance of limiting warming to 1.5% by the end of the century, citing data from we're at 1.2 degrees Celsius right now, folks, and we've got this terrible, terrible climate. We're seeing it now. We have to act now on this, which means we have to get rid of the politicians who are blocking this, which means we have to get rid of all the politicians from the major parties who are running for the presidency and who are running for Congress. And the first thing we have to have them do when they get into office is to expand the Supreme Court by 6 positions and then follow that by impeaching at least 5 of the 6 justices who are blocking progress right now. Citing data from the Energy Business Intelligence Agency Rystad, Global Witness noted that, quote, in 2050 alone, these 5 major private Western oil and gas companies are estimated to still produce oil and gas, which, when burned, equates to nearly 900 million tons of CO2. Quote, to balance out some of their emissions, many of these companies claim they will use methods designed to reduce emissions such as carbon capture and storage technologies, according to Net Zero Tracker. The group added, quote, however, carbon capture and storage remains unproven at scale and highly controversial. This puts the world on a dangerous trajectory of significantly overshooting climate targets. This graphic is Net Zero 2050, 5 oil and gas supermajors projected carbon emissions in 2050. Together, these 5 private oil and gas companies forecast to emit over 33 times more carbon in 2050 than the amount of carbon emitted in 2021 by the 5 countries most vulnerable to climate change. What do you suppose those countries are? Niger, Somalia, Chad, Guinea-Bissau, and Sudan. Countries we've been talking about, in recent days, most of which are in the Sahel. So this gives what is projected for the various companies 268 million tons for Mobil, 185 million tons for BP. I'm sorry, ExxonMobil. 173 million tons for Total Energy. Who the hell was Total Energy? Chevron, 134 million. And Shell, 114 million. 5 worst impacted countries will produce only 27 million. The unit here is 1 million tons of CO2. Countries worst impacted by climate change, taken from the University of Notre Dame's Global Adaptation Initiative. Global greenhouse gas emissions are currently at an all-time high as world leaders take little concrete action to rein in the primary source of those emissions, fossil fuels.
When you're mentioning Total Energies, who's Total Energies? Total Energies SC is a French multinational integrated energy and petroleum company founded in 1924 and is one of the 7 super major oil companies.
Did it have a previous name?
Total Energies, let me see.
It wasn't called Total Energies originally, I'm quite sure.
Well, on the stock price, the stock, it's TTE on the New York Stock Exchange. Headquarters, Courbevoie, France. CEO is Patrick Poyane. Founder is Ernest Mercier. Founded in 1924.
Okay, I'm sure it was called something else then. Well,
it has subsidiaries. This is subsidiaries. Let me see. Total Energy, Total Espana, Sun Power, Total, Deutschland. So it's different. Okay.
Okay, so we can't tell what the original name was.
No.
The new analysis by Global Witness comes as world leaders are preparing to convene for COP28 at the end of November, a summit that will follow months of devastating heat waves, wildfires, flooding, and other fossil fuel-driven extreme weather across the planet. Quote, this analysis shows the world's top private oil and gas companies, which already bear a huge responsibility for climate change, are not doing enough to cut emissions now or in the future, unquote. Global Witness said on Tuesday, quote, instead, they're on a dangerous path of foregoing drastic action now and continuing with climate wrecking, emissions. Again, putting profits over people, which is basically the slogan, of the neoliberals. In recent months, Shell and BP, both of which knew about the connection between fossil fuels and climate change, long before they publicly acknowledged it, have walked back pledges to curb oil and gas production and weakened their emission reduction goals. Meanwhile, both companies have continued rewarding investors with dividend hikes and also stock buybacks, and rewarding their executives, of course, because since they take so much of their compensation in company stock when they do the buybacks, that increases the value of the company stock and greatly increases the gain that comes to the corporate executives. Quote, it's time to bring in a permanent polluters tax to hold BP and other fossil fuel companies to account for the damage they continue to wreak, unquote. Dorothy Guerrero, head of policy and advocacy at the UK-based group Global Justice, now said earlier, Global Justice, well, that's said earlier this month after BP reported 2.6 billion in second quarter profits and announced another 1.5 billion in share buybacks. Quote, leaving this industry with the power to profit without consequence is not only morally abhorrent, it's plainly ludicrous in the face of a climate catastrophe that threatens us all, Guerrero added. Now, I have a suggestion to make. Instead of spending, what is it now, 125 billion or 130 billion on the war, okay, in Ukraine, why don't we forget about that kind of crap and just buy these 5 companies and shut them down? That's what we need to do. We can afford to buy them. It would be easy to buy them. And then the government could phase out the use, okay, of fossil fuels. And that's the cure for this stuff. Just buy them and get them out, okay, of this business. D, comments?
I think you pretty much said enough.
Oh, you think I said enough? I said
Yes.
socialize the bastards?
Yes, basically that's what needs to be done. Nationalize it all.
Nationalize it all. Yeah. Okay, well, here's an old issue that is coming to the surface again. Okay. Like so far, we've been talking about 3 neoliberal disasters tonight. Here's the 4th.
Oh,
And I mean, there are more. There are more every week.
I
Every
know.
there are new neoliberal disasters to talk about. The
Right.
headline,
And we look at foreign policy too. It's the same. I was going to say it's the same shit, different place, but it is neoliberal disaster.
it is. Those are neoliberal disasters too. They're causing neoliberal disasters in other countries, but we cover that under our foreign policy shows. Uh,
Yes.
okay, there's the Around the World with Dee and Friends show, uh, okay, which is 5 nights a week, and then I have my show on Tuesdays that deals with the impact of the coming loss, okay, of the war, okay, in Ukraine. Now, obviously, since I've had something like 22 episodes of this show, okay, already, I was talking about what was going to happen in this war 22 weeks ago. Well, here it is. It's the 23rd week now after we started. And what do we have? It's becoming clearer and clearer and clearer that there's going to be a loss, okay, in that war for U.S. interests, at least as they were defined by the Biden administration. People are finally beginning to recognize that Ukraine is not going to win this war. It's not going to exhaust Russia, but there are still some people saying absolutely ridiculous things like the Russian economy is going to collapse. They can't take it under the sanctions. There's a lot of nonsense. But uh, so people are starting to talk about some peace offerings. Like NATO, Jens Stoltenberg was making some peace offerings over the last couple of days. Uh, they have come to the conclusion that all Russia wants is territory. So therefore, okay, if Ukraine would only cede Crimea and the territories the Russians have already conquered, okay, in the Donbass, okay, and also Kherson, okay, and Zaporozhye, that uh, that would be a basis for settling the war, and in return, uh, what would be done, okay, for Ukraine is that the state thereby survived, uh, 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 would enter NATO. And these people, without even having talked to the Russians about this, without even a phone call to the Russians about this, somehow think this is an offer the Russians are going to snap up. I mean, this is idiocy. What the Russians wanted from the beginning, the most important of their demands, okay, from the beginning, by 2008, by the time they started warning about this, their demands were that Ukraine would always be neutral and would never be a part, okay, of NATO. Now, later on, after the coup, okay, and after the oppression of the Russian-speaking peoples, okay, of Ukraine, then they wanted to see the autonomy of those particular sections, okay, of Ukraine. That was what was added, okay, to their demands. But before this war started, they agreed to the Minsk agreements. We know what they wanted. And we know that the most important thing they wanted that was in the Minsk agreements was the neutrality of Ukraine. I mean, the NATO people just don't listen. Yes, we need a negotiated peace, but the center of that particular negotiation has to be the guarantee of the neutrality of Ukraine forever. Without that, it's not going to happen. Without that, we're going to get the total conquest of Ukraine by the Russians. That's what's going to happen. Anyway, let's get to the final article. New York advocates rally against dumping of radioactive waste in the Hudson River. Radioactive waste in the Hudson River. God. Quote, we have spent decades cleaning up the Hudson, and now the river is once again a major economic driver for the region and the state as a whole, unquote, said one state lawmaker. Quote again, let's keep protecting the Hudson, unquote. This piece is by Julia Conley, and it was written on August 15th. State and local lawmakers rallied with public health advocates in the White House in White Plains, New York on Tuesday to demand that Governor Kathy Hochul end her silence on legislation that was passed in June to prohibit the dumping of radioactive waste into the Hudson River. So catch this. The legislature in New York passes a bill to prohibit the dumping of radioactive waste into the Hudson River. And then the governor sits on it. Why would she sit on it? I haven't had a chance to look up her financing yet. The rally was held ahead of a listening tour, quote unquote, the Democratic governor is beginning regarding environmental legislation, and weeks before energy technology firm Holtec International, that's, I don't know, I'd almost bet that's a Canadian firm, is scheduled to begin discharging 45,000 gallons of wastewater from pools that were used to cool spent nuclear reactor fuel at the former Indian Point nuclear power plant. In other words, the plant has been shut down, but they still have this wastewater there that's radioactive. The company ultimately plans to dump 1 million gallons of the wastewater into the Hudson, which at least 100,000 people rely on for their drinking water. They want to dump 1 million gallons of radioactive wastewater. And they know 100,000 people rely on the Hudson for their drinking water. The New York legislature passed a bill, Assembly Bill 7208, Senate Bill 6893, in June to prohibit such discharges. But Hochul has yet to sign it. But Governor Hochul is running out of time to save the Hudson, said Emily Skydell, Hudson Valley organizer for Food and Water Watch. With less than a month until Holtec's planned toxic dump, Governor Hochul, I know she's a neoliberal, must waste no more time protecting our river. Governor Hochul must sign the Save the Hudson bill now before it's too late. Skip a few parts. The discharge was originally slated to begin in May, but Holtec paused the plan after outcry from U.S. Senators Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, and Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat of New York, as well as State Senator Peter Harkin, but Democrat of the 40th Senate District, and State Assembly member Dana Levenberg of the 95th Assembly District. She's a Democrat, too. These are 4 Democrats. Lawmakers spoke out as groups, including Riverkeeper and Physicians for Social Responsibility, warned that the wastewater could be contaminated with the isotope tritium, which is linked to cancer, to miscarriages, and genetic defects. Quote, "We have spent decades cleaning up the Hudson, and now the river is once again a major economic driver for the region and the state as a whole," unquote, said Harkin on Tuesday. "Let's keep protecting the Hudson. I urge Governor Hochul to sign our Save the Hudson legislation and truly thank all of the environmental advocates and supporters who are helping to stop radioactive wastewater from being dumped into this magnificent river, one of our country's national treasures," unquote. Assembly members representing Westchester County wrote to Hochul last week, urging her to sign the bill. More than 400,000 people, 35 localities, and 138 civil society groups have called on her to take action to stop the discharge. Quote, "Residents and advocates here have spoken loudly, and we have a responsibility to listen to their concerns," said Erica Pierce, a Westchester County legislator. Quote, "The radioactive wastewater needs to be tested thoroughly before it is released into the Hudson River, and we need those results back so they can be evaluated before this process can move forward. We don't get a redo on this," unquote. Assembly member Chris Burdick, a Democrat from the 93rd District, called Holtec's plan, quote, "unconscionable," unquote. "Such an action would be detrimental to our health, our water quality, and our environment," unquote, he said, and quote again, "We simply cannot allow this dangerous dumping to occur," unquote. Of course, okay, I entirely agree. What say you, Dee?
Well, some of the article I heard, there's a lot of it I didn't hear because the dogs were carrying on here. So I really didn't hear too much of it.
Okay, so you had a little problem with the computer?
But the dogs here,
Oh, with the dogs, okay.
they were singing and howling and carrying on that
Okay, with
I
the
wasn't able to hear.
environment of the computer.
Yeah.
Okay, so this seems like a pretty straightforward thing. It seems like it just cries out for investigation of the contributions Kathy Hochul has been getting. Because it's almost impossible to believe that she would hesitate on this if she was not getting any contributions from that company. Okay, that may not be the case. I'm going to check it out. We have another Dump the Corruption show tomorrow. So I'm going to check this out, okay, at Open Secrets. I haven't had a chance to do that. But I can't imagine what else could be motivating her. Just stop the damn company from dumping it. I mean, that's it. Let them find another solution. If they have to go into bankruptcy, they have to go into bankruptcy. But that water cannot be dumped into the Hudson River. That's for sure. So, we discussed 4 disasters tonight and the role of the neoliberals in causing those 4 disasters. So, I want to turn now to the comments here. We did treat some of the comments. Kay Ryan says, I'll pick up the comments at 9:55. Yes, Hillary doesn't look good for California. Robert Copeland says, a couple city council should be voted due to the fact that they take big money from California Apartment Association, okay, as they are anti-tenant. That is in Sacramento, California. Aren't all the landlords anti-tenant? Steve says we should be fine. We can always use water. Yeah, but you got to find a way to save it. Robert Copeland says rent is going up faster than people's income for a lot of people. Oh, yeah, that's been going on for a long time. So Robert says lots of landlords are just greedy people, okay, and or corporatists. Robert Copeland says next year I'm supporting the Justice for Renters Act, which expands rent control in California. Great, Robert, that's great. The people that should be voted out of the Sacramento are Lisa Kaplan and Eric Beguera, as they take big money. Good, Steve. Glad you found that out. I'm sorry. I said, good, Robert. Glad you found that out. And then Steve says, get him, Robert. Steve says, I met with Sukuru today for a while. We discussed um, uh, uh, Medicare for all activities and possible ballot initiative, okay, for Medicare for all. Yeah, I know Tsukuru is right at the center, right at the center, okay, of that. Steve Wilmer said, well, Sabby hit 50K subscribers today, so that's a good thing. Indeed, it is. Steve says, her show was a celebration. Kay says, okay, guys, I'm out of here for tonight. I love you all. We love you, Kay. Steve says, good night, Kay. Kay says, night, Steve. Robert Copeland says, Joe, some landlords are decent people. Yeah, Robert, I have to agree. Some landlords, okay, are decent people. Uh, you are right. Some landlords are decent people. So, Dee, I think it's time to say goodnight.
Yes, it is. And we will have shows again tomorrow. Tomorrow's my Friday.
Yes, we will have a show at 8 p.m. tomorrow, Dee's show, okay, Around the World with Dee and Friends. And I'm sure she'll have some interesting things to go over there. And I know I'll have some interesting things to say when it comes to Dump the Corruption, okay, on my 9 p.m. show. So for now, we're going to say please buy us some coffees. Our coffee accounts are up there. Dee's coffee account is right after her name. And my Buy Me a Coffee account is there also on the banner running across the bottom of the screen. And my Patreon account is up there by my name, okay, on top. So please like, share, and subscribe, of course, if you haven't already. And please do buy us a coffee or go to Patreon. And so thank you, everyone. Steve says good night, everyone. California, Robert Copeland says California Nurses Association most likely want to do a ballot measure. Of course, I would expect that from the California Nurses Association, but they'll probably come in as National Nurses United, won't they? And they will probably be very active in sponsoring the ballot initiative. So it's good night for now, and we will see you both tomorrow.
Yes.
And,
Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
and good night, Dee. I will see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming.
Oh, thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Let me leave the studio.